Hi, everyone. This is Rico Figliolini, host of Peachtree Corners Life. And here in the city of Peachtree Corners, we have a great guest today with us, Shaun Adams, new Community Development Director and actually City Attorney. Um, hey, Shaun, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Rico?
Good, good. Thanks for joining us. Give me a few minutes. I just want to say thank you to our sponsor, EV Remodeling Inc. Eli's the one that owns it, his family business. He's out here living in Peachtree Corners. His company does design to build, remodeling, renovation work. Great guy, great company. And he's a supporter of ours as an advertiser and corporate sponsor for these family podcasts. So we want to say thank you to him. And you can find out more information about evremodelinginc.com and about the company by visiting there. So thanks, Eli. Shaun, it's been, we had a conversation a week ago, a bit, talking a bit about your position and such. You've been actually working with the city for a while now already as the city attorney. Actually, the exact title would be what? I forgot now.
Assistant City Attorney.
Assistant city attorney. But you're taking more responsibilities. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to the city of Peachtree Corners?
Sure thing. So, I'm a Peachtree Corners resident. My wife and I moved here in 2012, a little bit before we were, officially started up as a city. Got two young boys, 8 and 12, in the Simpson and Pinckneyville cluster. So we get involved in the community. I've previously been involved with UPCCA here in the city, serve on the board with the Norcross Baseball Association over at Pinckneyville. And, background wise for me, I'm an attorney by trade with both public and private sector experience. So a while back previously, I was served with the Senate and their as a legal counsel for their Senate Judiciary, worked with the State County Association where I handled policy surrounding economic development, infrastructure related matters on behalf of county government. The cities
Mm-hmm.
have a GMA, Municipal Association, as kind of their sister organization. So did that for a while. Eventually got lured to the private sector, where I started doing a lot of land use and zoning development related matters, in addition to policy, both at the local and state level, and really kind of figured out, my heart's in government. There's a lot more you can do here when you have the ability to um, effectuate change in your community, an area where you're going to raise your family and you've got friends. And so when the opportunity came for me to come in with the city in-house as assistant city attorney, I jumped on it. Did that starting in January, and I think I'm 2 weeks in now with the additional title of community development director.
Right, because Diana Wheeler, who arguably is the first city employee, has retired from that position also. Not retired from work, but retired from working for for the government, actually, right? Uh, so you have multiple responsibilities though, because you still have the assistant attorney, city attorney title. So tell us a little bit then. What does that mean? What's your day-to-day activities? What's your responsibilities then?
So the primary day to day for community development director, especially, is we overarching are involved with the planning aspect, zoning, permitting. That's the core of what comes in to our shop. We also work in coordination with the economic development department, code enforcement, business licensing. So, I'd say the day to day really is reactionary. People come in, get a business license. That'll come to us to review to make sure that what they're proposing to do conforms with our code and is properly
Mm,
zoned.
right.
We'll get, as businesses or people are acquiring property, especially commercial property, in the city, a lot of times when part of their due diligence process, they want to make sure that the property is adequately zoned for what they want to do before
Hmm.
acquiring it. And so they'll submit requests for zoning certifications, is what they call them. So we get a lot of that on the day to day.
Okay.
The I think the more outward community facing part that you see is that our department staffs the planning commission, staffs the zoning board of appeals. We also staff our two development authorities to redevelopment downtown.
Hmm.
And so when a zoning application or any type of entitlement application comes in, we're the ones who take it in, review it for completeness. It's ultimately, my staff report that is the recommendation that goes to planning.
Right.
They do their part, and so forth, and goes on to council. So that's the part that I think the community tends to see, more and more from home improvement.
Right, right. See, I don't think the community, maybe some of them understand the complexities of this as far as the process goes, where people come in, they're commercial developers, they want to develop something, like you said, they come to you all first with the plan, and you tell them yay or nay as far as does it meet the compliance, and no, you can't do that type of store there or that type of business and stuff, right? And then they might come back to you again, right, before they actually put it in as an application, I would think. But the planning commission, so the first step of something like that, once it comes in, the planning commission gets presented that at a meeting. They get the report ahead, but it's presented to them, and then they have to decide based on that meeting, the input from the public, a recommendation from your department. There's been times probably where the department either recommended approval or denial, and the planning commission went a different way, but they might have conditioned things to allow them to go a different way, right? So it's give and take a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, and I would say the role, if you will, from the staff perspective, our job whenever we're looking at an entitlement matter that comes in is to take our comprehensive plan, which we
Hmm.
recently adopted a couple years ago, the update for
Right.
2045, as well as our code and consideration of what the current surrounding area is. And so whenever we're looking at it, I'd say a little more in the black and white department of the comprehensive plan encourages or discourages these uses. The code says this can or cannot be done.
Right.
And our recommendation is more about taking those facts and providing them, in a summary form, as well as recommended conditions that can be used to ensure that the property does align with whatever the vision of the plan was or whatever our code requires. And
Hmm.
then planning commission can take that, you know, pick it apart with the applicant as a part of the public hearing process, get the public's input in, and then whatever they ultimately take from that, they can use that to guide their recommendation to council. And council really is kind of a rinse repeat of council. The difference being from council standpoint, when they make their vote, it's final.
Right, right. So once this planning commission does a vote, it does go up to the city council. And then, like you said, it's a repeat almost of some of the same stuff. Um, it's a long process, but it's something necessary, right? So, but you all learned a bit from that, right? I mean, comprehensive document 2045 is sort of a living and breathing document in a way, right? It gets updated every 5 years. Things happen, new things come to play that maybe not might not have been thought about. We were talking a little bit at one point how the city adopted mostly the Gwinnett County ordinances with certain changes and adjustments to the regulations and zonings and stuff. But there's still things you all are still doing that you found that because of growth or whatever, you're still making changes to those, right? Just recently, in fact, uh, social recreation, social hobbyist. That was like two classifications that did not exist before. So tell us a little bit like how that would work and why those things, why changing that is important to the process.
Certainly. Well, and going back to taking over or kind of inheriting Gwinnett County's code and adopting it in, part of that process too is when you're setting up a new layer of government. My understanding, from that point in time was the areas where it was important was to kind of maintain that status quo of what was there. And so you pulled that in because it largely addressed, the issues that we had from a zoning and permitting standpoint at the time. But our area of the county and our city in particular is growing differently than Gwinnett County. So when Gwinnett counties, as they adjust their code over time, they're looking at it from the unincorporated areas of the county. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to focus on our node here in our city with our code. And so, you know, what the market's doing here varies differently from other parts of the county. The use types that are coming in that we're seeing may vary differently from the county. And so as we've grown as a city and kind of matured into, where we're headed, those opportunities that presented themselves to say, okay, our code needs to be aligned and addressed with what's coming our way. And so you bring up the two social uses.
Right.
COVID, I think what COVID told everybody was we actually like being around other people.
Hmm.
And so a lot of these uses have kind of formed that, you know, weren't contemplated in our code. I
Right.
always say government or the market outpaces government, right? So we find ourselves being reactionary to the market more often than not. And this is an example where people have come in and said, hey, we're looking at different locations in the city. We want to bring these uses to you, whether it be indoor pickleball or um, virtual racing or different things like that.
Hmm.
And, we look at our code and say, okay, well, there's not a very clean line where this use makes sense, but in other areas it makes sense here. And so what you have before you on the social recreation facility, a lot of that definition we actually found in Cobb County because they had to create one for the battery.
Oh, right.
And
Okay.
so, we look,
Great
you
example.
look around and see what other uses have done, what other jurisdictions have done, tweak it to make sense for your jurisdiction. And what that's allowing for now are those types of uses that the battery attracted now. We can
Right.
pull some of that here, and it's something different than your basic restaurant or basic shopping. It's a way for people to come in, dwell, have some food, drinks, have some fun, and
Right.
socialize. So you keep them on property longer. So we've had a couple uses interested in that. So that was the impetus behind that change.
Okay.
And the hobbyist one is more, think of like a private member organization or club.
Hmm.
Our code lumped those into lounges and nightclubs. Well, a
Hmm.
garden club getting together to talk about, flowers or
Right.
vegetables or something, that's very different than a lounge and nightclub. So how can
Sure.
we, distinguish those properly? We've had interest for a car club, coming in.
Hmm.
I think that we brought that up before.
Yeah.
And so again, looked at the code and said, okay, where does this make sense? This type of use, where has it been done elsewhere? And we came up with, language that allowed us to kind of put it where it, in a box where it makes sense without, addressing or potentially running into other unintended consequences, if you
Hmm.
will.
Hmm. And you all may still have to visit those things anyway, even after, because someone will always figure out one thing or another to do, and they'll be like, "Well, we didn't think about that." So I'm sure it's just like, humans are very creative. We'll just keep figuring out ways around things sometimes. So,
That's true.
but yeah, and I found that the classic car club, I thought that was interesting because I think they were talking about possibly where they can go, bring their cars actually there, and maybe even repair their cars or show off their cars and stuff like that. So I thought that was interesting. Um, and when we talk about uses and classifications, and part of what the city has done over time is develop certain areas, right? The central business district, the entertainment district. Um, these are overlays over existing, but they supersede the existing, right? The existing regulations. So an entertainment district has other rules to it, I guess, that will supersede the normal coding and such, the normal regulations. I mean, you all have to deal with all of that, right? Things coming in and changing.
And really what that is, your zoning ordinance is your foundation, right? And so in certain areas where maybe you might still use the same zoning districts, but you want a certain aesthetic, or you want buildings closer to the road than further back, or different things, overlays are a way to
Right.
say, okay, hey, this is still a commercial zoning, but it's specific to these uses. So it's another layer that gets added on. And I
Hmm.
would say functionally or legally, if you will, to the extent that the overlay is more restrictive than the underlying zoning ordinance, the overlay applies.
Okay.
If it's silent in the overlay, then the underlying zoning applies.
Gotcha. So the reason to bring all this up is actually at some point through the process, through the last few years, multi-use was one of the developments that's being allowed. And multi-use means apartments, retail, office, right? Essentially, or a mix of that, whatever that ends up being. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes not in our case per se, but there may be a zoning that wants to come in for 300 apartments, and it says, well, we're multi-use because we have 1,500 square feet of retail. Well, is that really the case? No. So the city has adjusted some of those things already, but there's been a lot of applications. So the city ended up putting in, I believe, a moratorium for 6 months on development of apartments or multi-use. So tell us a little bit what exactly that is, that stoppage for 6 months of looking at any or voting on any um, residential like that.
Sure. So the moratorium is specific to any entitlements application, so rezoning, special use permits, or variances that are with regard to residential or mixed use developments inside our central business district. And it's a 6 month. It started at 4 o'clock on last Friday, May 3rd,
Okay.
and we'll we'll run through 6 months.
Right.
And the idea behind that, and the purpose of it, really was, to your point, we have a lot coming through, but the way we're growing and the way the market is shifting, even in the last 18 months since the update to the comprehensive plan was adopted, kind of we looked at it and said, our central business district runs from the Ingalls shopping plaza and that commercial sector up there all the
Right.
way down to Target and Publix and Holcomb Bridge Road, and everything in Tech Park and Spalding Triangle Office Park and all that in between. And, as we've developed this downtown corridor, the Forum and Town Center, and those properties adjacent to it,
Mm-hmm.
what might make sense there to support the business uses around it versus inside of Tech Park could very well be two different things. Same thing with that kind of commercial entertainment node down by Target and Dick's Sporting Goods. And so,
Mm-hmm.
our comp plan is our living, breathing, guiding document as to the direction that we see the city growing. And so, to the extent that we feel like perhaps the trends are growing differently than what it articulates, we need to take a step back and look at it. So, what the moratorium does is allows us to maintain status quo, keeps those applications from coming in, and
Mm-hmm.
gives us time to engage our consultants, take a deep dive, bring in, the market force changes that we've seen, while taking into consideration the public input we received just, that short time ago, and figuring out how we can kind of tighten it up a little bit. Maybe it makes sense that downtown has its own character area and it's not central business district anymore. It's more of an entertainment character
Mm-hmm.
area or a downtown character area. You look at a lot of cities, you see that when they matured in that way, they kind of carve that out and treat it differently. And then within our office parks with Tech Park and Spalding Triangle, that's our economic engine, right? And one of the things that we talk about a lot and we pride ourselves on is we're the second largest city in the state with no millage rate, no property
Mm-hmm.
tax in the city.
Okay.
And so the way we're able to do that, though, is because we have a balance in jobs and residents. And so that service burden to operate the city, the revenue, we're able to generate sufficient revenue through business license fees, sales tax revenue, things like that, that the business community supports, franchise fees, and what have you, to where we don't have to shift that burden down to the resident at the property tax level.
Right.
And so, because of that, when you go back and you look at our economic engine, our office stock, there's a priority there wanting to preserve our office stock as much as we can. Even though office is kind of waning right now, that pendulum is still trying to figure out where it's going to settle as it swings back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, we only have one mixed use development zoning district right now in our code. And it's the one, like we talked about, we tweaked it a little bit, but
Right.
it's, a 3 use requirement. You can do 32 units an acre and go up from there if you have certain bonus density bonuses that you do, public art installations, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that zoning, that district may make sense in a downtown entertainment area. But when you're talking about 5 to 8 acre office sites where maybe you have underutilized parking or
Mm-hmm.
underutilized buffer areas between office buildings, that may not be the best use. That may not be the best way to carve it out. And so, like Gwinnett County, for instance, has 3 different zoning districts, or mixed use ordinance zoning districts, and depending on the area where they're appropriate. And so it may be that we look at it and say, inside of Tech Park, we may have a mixed use ordinance, but it should be more commercial focused than residential focused. Downtown, it makes sense. You need the residential body heat to support the retail and
Sure.
restaurants that we have. So it makes sense that it's a little more residential heavy in that node. But in the office area, to me, the residential should be more supporting or accessory to the office. And so, you would want to the extent that you would have a zoning district that you would deem to be appropriate in that area, you would want it to align with that objective. And so it's looking at that and studying it during the moratorium process, figuring
Hmm.
out on our comp plan what changes might we need to make to
Right.
help facilitate that. And from there, what changes in our code we might also need to do. And that's going to be what we're going to be, having our nose to the ground on, for the next 6 months.
Sorry about that. It's the black cat.
No worries. I hope that doesn't mean anything moving forward.
There's no ladder, so we're good. um, well, it hasn't crossed my path. Um, yeah, it big cities. COVID has done a really bad thing to a lot of big cities, right? Um, they residential people fled the cities. When they fled the cities, retail died. Uh, when office buildings, people weren't coming to work. That whole downtown area of a lot of cities just died out for a little bit, and then came back, or struggling to come back. So many different facets. Smaller cities like us, we're fortunate, right? Because we didn't, we're not, even though we depend on the commercial aspect of it, we've had um, good growth, right? A lot of different businesses coming in, like intuitive robotics and such. Even though we may lose a business here and there, we're getting businesses that are moving in, campuses. So I get all the the idea of technology park, 500 acres, where developers will come and say, there's this three buildings here. They're not occupied, and maybe we could put a multi-use there. I mean, I think at one point we discussed how most of the multi-use is outward facing, so there's none really inside the heavy density of tech park. But there are buildings that aren't completely occupied, so I'm sure there's pressure right now to want to develop those, or companies wanting to sell it and get rid of it. And then other places say, well, the only ones that are going to buy it are going to be the apartment developers because they can get the loans for that, even at the rates that we're talking about, the higher rates of loans right now. Um, so is the moratorium right now will allow you to have public meetings, will allow you to bring in your experts, you said. Will there be public meetings, like to get some input that way during the process?
If we feel going through it that perhaps some public, if part of what we're looking at would benefit from public engagement, we certainly could do that. Typically, the moratorium's purpose is more for a pause,
Right.
because the way things work when something comes in. And so, for example, we've got 3 public hearings on the Planning Commission agenda. They came in before the moratorium, even though they're not being heard until the moratorium has started. So they are subject to whatever the code and everything was at the time their application was submitted. So if we were
Okay.
trying to continue to make these changes on the fly, and everybody comes in every time their app comes in,
Hmm.
they're kind of protected based off of where the code and everything is at
Right.
the time their application comes in.
Right.
If we make
Right.
a decision 2 weeks later to change it, it doesn't retroactively apply. So the
Okay.
moratorium is really to say, hey, development related to this space, we need to pause it because we don't think that we adequately address where we want to go. And so we need time to do that without more Campbell's noses sliding under the tent. And so, you know, in this situation for us, we at least benefit from the fact that we've gotten the community engagement within the last 18 months from the update process.
Right. That's true.
And, so part of it is, what we're hearing there, I don't know how much that's necessarily changed, but when we started looking deeper into our comp plan and our code and seeing what's coming our way, it
Hmm.
was more about how can we ensure that the code and comp plan more closely aligns with the community engagement, with the vision of the city as it relates to those, the market forces that are coming at us right now,
Right.
so that we have a way to help, to the extent it's a good development, make it the best development possible for the city. And if
Right.
it's not a good development, have a legally defensible way to articulate why it is not in the best interest of the city.
Makes sense. We when we were talking a week ago about development and interconnected developments, looking at the larger picture, right? Um, having a entertainment district, for example, is the larger look of what we have there. But there may be smaller developments. We talk about micro use, micro mixed use, as something as a tool of looking versus a larger mix. It's hard to plan things out when different developers are buying different properties, doing different things. So there's
Right.
not one cohesive plan, right? So Gwinnett Place Mall, for example, they seem to have a big plan that they want to do. I've seen some of the renderings and some of the ideas of what they want to do there, which is great. But they still have to depend on a lot of these individual properties coming along for the ride, if you will. And I think that's part of what the city faces, right? In a way, um, you got different developers coming in. They want to do their own thing, and it's not looking at the bigger picture, which is what you all are doing with this moratorium too, right?
Right. It's, we can use the comprehensive plan, the character areas and all that to help the developer see what our bigger picture is. So they understand that parcel that they're looking at, how are they designing something for that one parcel that is, a piece that's beneficial to the bigger picture. And, and so an example I'll give right now and something that I think we'll be looking at is our comp plan for CBD, Central Business District area, currently says that residential, multifamily townhomes, stack flats are appropriate in mixed use environments inside a central business district, as long as it's near or adjacent to major thoroughfares. Like that's kind of the
Okay.
area in which you look at it. And so as long as you meet an acreage threshold, 5 acres in Tech Park, 8 acres in other areas of the CBD,
Hmm.
then you can come in for a mixed use. And well, do we want 8 to 10 micro mixed use developments running up and down Technology Parkway? Maybe not. Maybe it's
Mm.
Technology Parkway, Tech Park as a whole is a master plan, vision through the comp plan process to where there are areas where it might make sense for the pockets of residential to be there to be supportive of the office stock. And
Right.
we actually were talking the other day, one of the things that we're going to do, in coordination with our economic development team is to understand, basically go out and kind of understand the current status of the buildings in the area in
Hmm.
terms of, I hate to say grading them, but for lack of a better word, what is the current condition of those structures? How
Yeah.
useful are they? Which ones are performing well? Which ones are not performing
Right.
well? Because ultimately, that's the market's going to come to the ones that aren't performing well
Hmm.
and say, hey, I can't put enough capital in this thing to lease it up anymore. And so therefore I need to sell it and redevelop it.
Right.
And here's what you can do it for, right? So if we know on the front end where those are as we're looking at the area as a whole, we might have an understanding too of where redevelopment play makes sense within Tech Park
Yeah.
and see if it can help kind of establish those nodes, if you will, of where redevelopment makes sense so that it's not a bunch of micro, parcel by parcel 5 acre lots, but perhaps
Right.
this parcel right here maybe makes sense for this type of redevelopment because of what's around it that's already stable or strong. It's only going to make stronger. And when you look at it holistically, it becomes your mixed use.
I like the way you talked about it before, that Technology Park would have almost like its own master plan, um, which makes sense to me because it is the nature of what it was when it first started and where it is now, right? If we're looking to attract businesses, like you said earlier, which was a great thing to point out, is that we don't know what's going to be 10 years from now. I mean, before COVID came along, we didn't know COVID would, even if the smart minds looked at COVID prior to that, an example of something, they may not have realized how it effectively changed the way we work, the remote work aspects, the hybrid work aspects, the uses of buildings, the way they're being used now and not, where companies either are taking less space than they needed and cutting down the commercial space, or selling their buildings entirely and moving their companies because they're hybrid and they don't need that. Maybe what they're doing is shifting costs by getting something newer. And you were talking about grading a little bit, which is important to a degree, right? Because commercial grades for offices exist anyway, right? There's grade A office space, grade B office space. That all depends on whatever, footage, amenities, and stuff like that, age of the building, I guess. Um, and that makes sense for, I think, the city to audit and do this, because there may be people that come in with bigger ideas, or maybe even the city has a bigger idea, which it often does. I mean, Curiosity
Mhm.
Lab, Autonomous Technology Parkway. I mean, these are big ideas, right? Who knows? Maybe there might be a maybe a 10-acre technology campus for a college that could come here. I mean, there's all sorts of things that even the city can even go out and solicit and say, listen, if you're going to be putting it somewhere in the North Perimeter, why not here? You know?
Right.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is what planning, this is what a city does. And, yes, do you sometimes, I'm sure you feel like you're reactive on things. So this moratorium at least will put that stop for a little bit. Um, but do you have are there other plans? Are there other things in mind that you all want to implement and do in the coming year or two?
Um, I mean, I think honestly, we'll see what kind of comes out of this moratorium a little
Hmm.
bit. I know for me, some of it is just, process internally and being able to work, in coordination with the other departments. I mean, I know from economic development side, working with them, there's a lot of stuff that we're talking about doing to be proactive. While government may be inherently reactive, to the extent that we have capacity to be proactive, I think it better positions us to attract good companies or to go chase good companies that might be supportive of not only the mission of the city, but to the needs of the community. And so we're putting things in place internally there, working on business retention, being able to understand what our current businesses need as a part of kind of that inventory, if you will. So I think that's a big one. Um, I just got the information earlier where the governor signed our, community improvement district legislation bill.
Hmm.
So there's, the opportunity to look at that and have those conversations. I think that's a little longer runway
Right.
for that to get moving, but it's still
And that
something that we're taking a look
and that CID is a self-taxing district, I think. In what part of the city was it, or is it just in? Is there a specific area that covers? Forget.
So that was enabling legislation to allow us to do it in the city. The
Okay.
process would be, once you get a certain number of property owners on board,
Right.
51% of the property owners that have 75% of the value in an area,
Hmm.
then council would adopt a resolution that defines that area and sets the board construct up and the process and the fee
Gotcha.
arrangement. To your point, the self-taxing aspect of it, and it is commercial only.
Hmm.
Something I guess would point out would be commercial businesses only that would do that.
Right.
Gateway 85 is the closest example because part of it comes into Peachtree Corners on Jimmy Carter Boulevard.
Yeah. 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 That's a successful. That's been around for a while too, I think.
Mhm.
Um, have we? I think we've hit on quite a few things actually. Is there anything I've missed that we should be doing? I'd like to, make this somewhat of a regular thing, podcast that we can talk about things and upcoming issues like the moratorium and stuff like that. But or is there anything else you'd like to share, Sean? Any surprises that you've had along the way, or?
No real big surprises yet. Like I said, we do
Okay,
have a packed agenda with 3 public hearings coming up. A planning commission next Tuesday. The day building and mixed use rezoning will be
right.
heard, and the Peachtree Corners lofts, that Peachtree Corners Circle condo development from a couple years ago is having a change of conditions, some minor, some site plan changes, building reorganization and
Mm,
design that they're coming back to us for. We have
okay.
an art gallery in the forum that needs a special use permit for a special event, and a couple of text amendments. I feel like every month so far I've kind of had some, looking at the code, looking at what's coming in, and saying, hey, we might need to tighten this up here or open this up there. And so we've got a couple of those text amendments coming through that'll kind of
Hmm.
align with what's coming our way, and that'll be a planning commission, and then they'll all be first read for council next a week later, but it'll be the June council meeting when they'll actually get council for a vote.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And that the art gallery for people that may not know in the forum, is not opened yet. And because they need some adjustment to it, I guess. But that's an art gallery that's also going to be an event space. I guess that was the issue.
Yeah, I believe if I remember correctly, he's got a location in Buckhead, and it's primarily an art
Yes.
gallery, but he likes to rent it out for corporate
Mm-hmm.
events, business parties, that type of thing. And you kind of leverage the space that way. And the way our code is set up, that's a special use permit requirement. So even though all the activity is internal, to the building, it will be
Yeah.
subject to the underlying zonings, but the special use permit will have some additional conditions specific to their use in that suite.
Cool. All right. I'll have, for those listening, I'll have related links in the podcast notes. This way you can, check out the agenda for the upcoming Planning Commission and eventually the City Council, although that one may not be out yet, the agenda. Obviously, it'll be after the Planning Commission meeting. Great. We've been talking here with Shaun Adams, Community Development Director of the City of Peachtree Corners. Shaun, I appreciate you spending some time with me this Friday afternoon doing this podcast, and look forward to other podcasts with you, learning a bit more about the things that go on in the city as well that you handle. So,
Thank you, Rico. I appreciate it, and I look forward to it too.
Yep. Hang in there with me for a minute. Thank you, everyone. Check out our other podcasts as well, Prime Lunchtime with City Manager, Urban Ebb, and check out the magazines that we produce as well as our website, livinginpeachtreecorners.com. You all have a great weekend or week and enjoy the safety of your family. Take care.